Disclaimer!
The following section discusses rape, sexual assault, murder, and the abuse of animals. This episode of the podcast may be experienced more shocking than others. Viewer discretion or listeners' discretion is advised.
Woohoo!
Hi guys, welcome back to episode 3, and this episode is about John Wayne Gacy, and my lovely hostess called Lizzy is gonna talk about him. And so I'm gonna give Lizzy the mic. Woo! Yeah.
So John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown, was born on March 17th in 1942, Chicago, Illinois. Gacy was second of 3 children to John Gacy and Mary Robinson. Mary was mainly just a stay-at-home mom, so Gacy was mainly parented by his mom. His father was an alcoholic because he served in World War I, and that left him severely traumatized, which made him turn to alcohol as a coping mechanism for his trauma, obviously. And his father wasn't a very nice person towards neither his wife or kids. He was verbally and physically abusive towards both of them.
Oh, that's
But-
sad, man.
Yeah, very sad. So yeah, his father wasn't a very nice person. He was very abusive, both verbally and physically, towards his wife and kids, but specifically towards John Gacy. It is speculated that he was being targeted more because he was the only male in the house, and the girl would never put up a fight against his father, so it wasn't really fun to do anything to them. Gacy has stated in one of his interviews that one of his earliest memories with his father was when the both of them were in the garage, and his father was showing Gacy some mechanical parts he was working on because he was, I think it was a car,
Mechanic.
a car mechanic.
Yeah.
Gacy, being a child, was obviously very curious about what all these parts and tools were. So he started playing around with some of the parts, like it was very innocent. But his father got extremely mad and grabbed a leather belt and started hitting Gacy with it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then his mom walks in and tried to stop his father from hitting him, but that only resulted in his father abusing her as well. Since these beatings occurred so often, after a couple of years, Gacy would just sit there quietly and take all of the abuse because he knew that if it wasn't him who was getting abused, then it would be his mom and his sister. So Gacy was basically sort of a punching bag for his father and was basically saving his mom and sisters from getting abused. Apart from being very physically abusive, Gacy's father would also be verbally abusive towards him. He would let him know how disappointed he was in him at really random, uncalled for moments. He would let him know that he's dumb, stupid, a failure, and he would be extremely homophobic towards Gacy for absolutely no reason, because Gacy never openly talked about his sexuality to anyone. But even though he never talked about being a homosexual, Gacy's father was convinced that he was gay, and he would insult him with very awful things relating to it. A bit after Gacy turned 7 years old, one of his fathers got very close to this man, and this man would start to sexually abuse John Gacy over the next couple of months. And Gacy never actually told anyone about this because deep down in his mind, he thought that his father would blame Gacy for it happening and punish him for it. And later that year, Gacy actually went on to sexually abuse someone himself. He and one of his friends touched this girl in their class at school, and Gacy's father ended up finding out about this and got extremely mad. So he got out the belt and beat Gacy completely bruised with it. And since Gacy had stopped reacting to these beatings, he would just sit there and let it happen. He didn't make any sounds, he didn't cry, nothing. Gacy didn't react the way that his dad wanted it wanted him to react to the beatings. So his dad wasn't really getting a kick out of it anymore after a certain time. So what his dad started to do was beat him harder with new objects to like start and get a reaction out of Gacy. And it actually got to a point where it was so bad that when Gacy's father had hit him, he actually got knocked out of consciousness, and this incident left Gacy with permanent health issues. He would faint on random moments and had frequent blackouts, which caused him to be hospitalized. So, apart from all of the fainting and blackouts, Gacy had other like permanent health problems as well. He was born with a heart condition, and at one point he had a burst appendix, which caused him to be a lot in the hospital at the time, which when you're a child obviously is not very fun.
Yeah, kind of traumatizing and stuff. Yeah.
And even though there were many medical reports that would support these like health issues, his father for some reason never believed him, and he saw all of the like health issues, like the fainting and the blackouts, as like a cry for help and like attempt to get attention and empathy by Gacy. When Gacy had turned 18 years old, he had decided that he wanted to pursue a career in politics, and like psychologists suggested that the main reason he chose to do this was to impress his father and earn his father's respect. But despite these attempts to win his father's respect, it actually ended up going the opposite way, because Gacy wanted to work for a Democratic Party, which was definitely not the like party that his father supported, which gave the father even more reason to dislike Gacy. So at this point, Gacy was almost a fully grown man, which meant that his father would struggle more and more when he would try to take on Gacy physically. And apart from the guy that Gacy was like a big guy in general, due to his heart condition, he couldn't exercise, which meant that he had been suffering from like being overweight basically his whole life. And because Gacy was bigger than his father couldn't physically like take him on anymore. So he decided to go for a different approach and really like started to mentally abuse him. One of Gacy's most memorable moments was when his father had like bought him a car, but he didn't really buy it because his dad knew that Gacy wasn't able to afford a car by himself at the time. So he told Gacy that he could have the car like right now, and that he had to pay him back monthly, like with monthly payments. But the catch was that whenever Gacy would not behave the way that his dad liked, or when he was short or late on his payments, that his dad would just take away the car keys. And Gacy was working a job at the time. And like when the car keys were taken away, this meant that Gacy would often be very late to his job or just completely missed work at all. And he risked losing his job because of this. So this kept on going for about a year, when Gacy got so tired of it that he decided to get a spare set of keys, which meant that the next time that his dad would take away the car keys, Gacy still had a way of getting to work. So the next time this happened, his father found out about it and got like very angry, like extremely angry. And as a way of punishing Gacy for it, he took like one of the parts of the car out that a car needs to be able to drive. I don't know what part exactly this is, but if you know something about cars, I guess you can figure it out. So yeah, during this incident, Gacy was 20 years old, and because of the constant fear and stress and abuse that he had to endure thanks to his father, he had decided that it would be best if he moved out of the house and lived on his own. So Gacy ran away from home and he moved to Las Vegas in Nevada, which is very far away from his town in Chicago. It's like almost 3,000 kilometers. So when he was settling in Las Vegas, he literally just took any job he could, and then that's when he started off as an ambulance driver. And at first, the job was going fine for him. he was not really enjoying it, but he was fine with doing it because he could get a paycheck off of it. But after a while, it got too stressful, like driving. Like you had to be really fast and precise, and you had to like carry people who were in need of emergency help into the ambulance and drive them to the hospital, which I can understand is very stressful. So because it got too stressful, he decided to quit working as an ambulance driver, and he still wanted to work for the hospital, but instead of like actively going out and helping people in the open, he had decided that he would take a job at the mortuary. So yeah, Gacy at the time was working at the mortuary, and his employers and colleagues were not aware that when he was working there at the time that he was actually homeless. And I don't know why, but instead of like finding a real place to stay, like a small apartment or just like a room or something, he instead decided to live amongst the dead bodies in a
Yeah,
mortuary.
okay, that's weird.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, it's really weird.
He literally bought a small secondhand bed and he set it up in a small room behind the embalming room. For those who don't know, embalming is the process of preparing bodies for a funeral service or burial. So it basically means like if there's any blood or something, they will clean up the blood. They will stuff the body with.
Oh, so comforting to know that. Yeah, amazing.
They will stuff the bodies so there won't be any liquids leaking out or something. They will remove the organs. And if it's needed, they will put on some makeup to make them look like less dead, I guess. But yeah, he ended up living there for months, and weirdly enough, none of his colleagues ever found out. But yeah, in the embalming room, one of his first like crimes, I guess, had been committed there. Right before Gacy was about to go to bed, he got the intrusive thought to just open one of the fridges where they keep the like dead bodies. You know what I mean? And in one of the fridges, Gacy knew was the body of a deceased teenage boy. And as you could have guessed, this was the fridge that he would end up opening. So he pulled out the table and climbed on top of it, and he just laid next to the corpse and started cuddling and touching it. Then he would proceed to do this for a couple of minutes.
Ah, interesting. So weird.
It's really weird. But at first he was just enjoying it, but after he was like realizing what he was doing, he freaked out and just had a full-blown panic attack. He jumped off the table and just put the body back, and then he tried to sleep it off, but the next morning when he woke up, he felt so extremely anxious that he desperately called up his mother and begged her if he could come home. So yeah, the next morning, Gacy was back in his hometown in Chicago living with his parents. Yeah, instead of finding a job there, he decided to go back to school. Um, he applied for a business university, and by the age of 21, he had graduated and received his diploma. So yeah, after Gacy had graduated from university, he had been able to get a job in a shoe shop as a sales associate. It was a really nice shoe shop. Yeah, Gacy really excelled at this job because he was very good at like persuading people and manipulating them sort of to buy things in the store. And because of this, because he was so good at his job, he kept getting promotion after promotion. And for one of these promotions, Gacy had actually had gotten the offer to get transferred to a different store in Springfield, which is about 3 hours from Chicago by car. And when he got there, he met this lovely young woman named Marilyn Myers, who he eventually started dating. So yeah, next to this full-time sales associate job, Gacy had also joined this organization called the Jaycees. And the Jaycees was a civic organization including people between the ages of 18 and 40. The Jaycees were established in 1920 and started off as a group to help young men develop their personal skills, like just improve their lives, I guess. But yeah, later the organization also had decided to include women. And Gacy actually played a huge part in the development of the Jaycees, as he was a very active member of the organization. He was doing a lot of fundraising and charity work for them, and this caused his reputation to be very high there. And at one point, he was actually like promoted to the vice president of the organization. But yeah, apart from this, Gacy had also been very curious about exploring his sexuality because he had deep down always known that he was attracted to men and that he was a bisexual, but he never actually tried to initiate anything. So yeah, one night he was out drinking with one of his friends from the JCs, and that friend had actually tried to make a move on JC, and I think you can guess what had happened because Gacy ended up cheating on his wife with this man, but it has never been found out if she ever knew about this. But yeah, after this incident, Gacy felt very confused, with his sexuality and stuff, because he had only ever been with women, and he liked being with Marlon, but he was also very excited about the possibility of getting with other men. So yeah, deep down he realized that getting with other men was what he wanted, and he kind of felt like he was stuck in a relationship because he didn't want to leave her. But at one point it wasn't because he loved her, but because she came from a very wealthy family, because her father was a very rich man, and he owned three KFC franchises that he was going to hand down to his daughter and whoever his spouse might would have been at that time.
KFC has good chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah, good chicken.
Very good. So yeah, Gacy loved the idea of being rich, and he decided to propose to Marilyn because of that. And within half a year of the proposal, Gacy and Marilyn were married and living in Iowa, where she was originally from. And at this point, her father was ready to hand down the franchises to his daughter. So now Gacy was owning 3 KFC franchises, and he was making a lot of money. Like in today's money, it would be like $130K a year.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Which is a lot.
Rich
So
man.
yeah, you would think that Gacy would be very happy and excited about having this opportunity, but it made him feel even more miserable as time went on because he was married to a beautiful woman, and he was making a lot of money, but he simply just could not get the experience, the sexual experience that he had with the guy from the JCs out of his head.
Mm-hmm.
And to him it felt as if he was living a lie, and living with Marilyn and owning these franchises was not what he wanted in life, and he just wanted to explore his sexuality and stuff. So as Gacy's very own weird way of coping with this, underneath one of the QC franchises, there was a basement, and in that basement he had created a club which he literally just called the club, and he would occasionally yeah, very creative, very original. But yeah, he would create the club there, and occasionally after work he would have the employees over for drinks. But keep in mind, the employees that he had hired were mainly teenage boys or young men in their early 20s, let's say between 14 and 22 years old or something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he would also never have older men or women at all down there. So yeah, Gacy would provide them with alcohol, and because most of them were underage or just really early into their 20s, they never really had any experiences with alcohol, and that meant that they did not know their limits. So Gacy had decided that he would just try and take advantage of that. He would take advantage of the fact that these young boys would get drunk so fast and easily, and he started making sexual advances on them. And when they would not go along with it or didn't appreciate it, JC would just play it off as if it was a test for joining the Gacys. So yeah, Gacy would regularly cheat on his wife with his employees. Gacy and Marilyn went on to have 2 children together, a son and a daughter named Michael and Christine. And in an interview, Gacy stated that these were the best years of his life because ever since Gacy had become successful and had a wife and children, the relationship between him and his father started to getting better, and Gacy had finally earned his father's love and respect, and his father actually ended up apologizing to Gacy during all of this for the abuse he had to endure his whole childhood, and his father's exact words were, "I was wrong about you." So yeah, since Gacy had moved to Iowa, he also had transferred to the Iowa JCs, which basically is the JCs that he also was joining in Chicago, but in Iowa. And Gacy had a very high reputation there, and he would like often host parties in his basement club underneath one of their franchises.
Yeah, they did a lot of drugs.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
a
drugs,
lot
drink.
with prostitutes. So yeah, after gaining all of the JC's trust, Gacy would make a very weird suggestion. For some reason, he had told all the men that they had to bring their sons along to the next party, and
Suspicious.
yeah, very suspicious. And these boys were all aged between 14 and 17. So Gacy had mapped out a whole plan on how he was going to do, how he was going to like take advantage of these children, and he like made a whole plan. He would tell the boys that he was doing scientific research on homosexuality, and that he would be doing real tests on people, and that he needed participants. So he would pay the boys around $500 each to engage in sexual acts with him. And because they were so young, obviously they would not let these $500 slide, because back in the days, this was a lot of money. So Gacy's very first like sexual assault victim was a 15-year-old boy named Donald Voorhees, and he was one of the JC's sons. So yeah, Gacy got Voorhees very drunk, and for some reason he decided that showing him pornographic material was a good idea. And as they were watching this, it was heterosexual pornography. Gacy turned to the boy and told him, you know, in order to have sex with a woman, you need to have sex with a man first.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah, it's really gross. And the boy was very drunk at this point, and because he looked up to Gacy and admired him so much, he just believed him and agreed to have sex with him. And they did this a few more times over the next couple of months. And after after over half a year, the boy decided to tell his father what Gacy had been doing to him. And like, of course, the father got really mad and immediately reported Gacy to the police.
Of course.
Yeah, so the police ended up arresting him. And to make a long story short, to get revenge at the boys, Gacy offered one of his other employees I think it was $3,000 to track down the boy, beat him up, and like forced to tell him to like say that his statement was false.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah, this plan backfired, and at this point, Gacy was charged with not only sexual offenses, but also with trying to intimidate a witness, which made him look even more guilty. So before this trial, Gacy was given psychiatric evaluations and observations, and he eventually got diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, which is a type of personality disorder characterized by impulsive, irresponsible, and criminal behavior. So he was deemed to fit trial, and he pled guilty. But yeah, then he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And in prison, he was a very good prisoner for some reason. And the staff and the guards were very happy with him. He became very popular and made a lot of changes in the prison. He fought for better living conditions, increased pay for inmates, and even a mini golf course in a prison yard for some reason. So after a bit over a year, he had applied for parole, which was rejected. So this motivated him to try harder and improve himself. And while he was doing this, his father, unfortunately, well, not really, but his father had passed away.
Rest in peace. Yes,
and, yeah, kind of. And Gacy was very heartbroken over this, because it took him very long to earn his father's love and respect. And yeah, he just didn't have it for a very long time. So he was really struggling with his grief. And when he tried to apply for supervised leave to be able to attend the funeral, it got denied. And yeah, this made it harder for him to properly grieve, because he could not say goodbye to his father. So Gacy...
Well, I guess that's what you get from assaulting a child, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I guess. Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe a little bit deserved.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, Gacy eventually applied for parole again, and after serving for a year and a half, he was released from prison. And keep in mind, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison and was released after 1 year and 6 months.
Yeah, that's really nothing.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so 9 months into his probation, Gacy was charged with sexually assaulting yet another teenage boy just 9 months after he got released. And it is believed that Gacy had picked up this boy from the bus station and took him back to his home where he tried to sexually assault this boy, but the boy somehow managed to escape and run away. But when the trial was happening, the victim did not show up at the courthouse, which meant that Gacy, like the case was automatically dropped, and Gacy was actually let free with zero punishment. Like his probation did not get like extended or anything. So Gacy laid low for a long time, and 4 days after his probation ended, he sexually assaulted yet another teenage boy.
Wow.
Oh my
Surprising.
God. What the hell?
Gacy somehow managed to obtain a police badge, and he showed the boy this badge and told him to just get into the car with him. And obviously, because the boy was scared and it was a cop, at least he thought it was a cop, he did not hesitate to get into the car because he didn't want to like disrespect a police officer, since that might be a crime. I don't know if it is. Yeah, it might be.
Yeah, actually, I don't know really.
Yeah, so Gacy drove the boy to his house where he would then force him to engage in sexual acts with him. And when he was done with doing that, he just told the boy, "You can go now," and just like let him free, I guess. But the boy actually refused this and told Gacy that if he did not give him any money, he was going to go to the police, like kind of blackmailing him. So Gacy did not want to give him any money. So as said, the boy went to the police station and told them everything that happened. And when Gacy was interrogated, he basically like told him this bullshit story that the boy wanted money and was willing to ruin Gacy's life over it. And yeah, due to the lack of evidence provided by the boy, the case eventually got dropped, and Gacy did not receive any punishment.
Yeah, and at this point, Gacy was still living with his mother because when he got out of prison, he did not have a place to live anymore since his ex wife had taken all of their property. There were a lot of rumors and conspiracies surrounding Gacy, especially given his past crimes, and now that the police were often showing up at his house. His own mother started to grow sick of all of this, and it got to a point where she offered Gacy money to move out of her house.
Yeah, I think she was done with him.
I think so too. Yeah. Gacy gladly accepted this offer. He had been wanting to move out for a long time now, but he had not been able to afford to move out due to a lack of money. He put down a deposit on his house in a small town called Cook County,
Illinois.
Illinois.
In America.
Gacy saw this as an opportunity for a brand new start and managed to build himself a reputation in his new town. He would always offer out free favors to gain people's trust. He would often host big parties at his house and would invite lots of people, even well known politicians. And during this blooming time in his life, Gacy had been reconnecting with one of his old high school friends, Carol Hoff. The two of them really felt a deep connection with each other and ended up getting married. Hoff and her two daughters moved into Gacy's new home, and together they lived like a real family. Gacy also decided that he was going to start his own business. He became a contractor doing lots of small jobs like building, landscaping, and gardening jobs. Because Gacy was a very popular man in town, he was booked a lot and very busy with his job to a point where it had gotten so much that he had to start hiring other employees to help him out. At this point, Gacy was making the same amount of money that he had been making back when he was the owner of the 3 KFC franchises. But history had been repeating itself in another way too. Many, if not all of the employees he was hiring were teenage boys.
Yeah, here we go again.
Yeah. Gacy would invite these boys over to his house to get them drunk and have them engage in sexual acts with him in return for money. What the fuck? promotions, or even extra work jobs. A lot, a lot of the time, the boys would accept his offers, but when they would turn him down, he would come up with an excuse as to why his employee owed him a big sum of money that they obviously were not able to pay back, and would then go on to say, "Oh, don't worry, you can pay back in sexual favors instead." Some of these boys were as young as 14 years old. If the boy still tried to turn Gacy down, he would remind them he owns a lot of guns and was not afraid to use them. One time he even told one of the boys, "Do you know how easy it would be for me to get one of my guns out and kill you?"
Oh,
Okay. How
okay.
easy would it be to get rid of the body? Gacy went to extreme lengths of threaten the boys into doing what he said, and would often threaten to kill them if they would not have sex with him.
In 1973, Gacy was hired to do some work in Florida, which was an 18-hour drive away from where he lived.
Oh,
Gacy brought one of his employees to come with him, and he booked a hotel for both of them, where they could share a bed. And
okay.
mind you, it's a boy, like a underaged boy.
Underaged.
The boy didn't know about this, and when he entered the room, he was a bit shocked to see that they will be sharing one bed with each other. He did not say anything because he didn't want to cause any problems. But in their first night of sleeping there, Gacy had raped the teenage boy.
Oh my.
The whole time they were in Florida, the boy kept quiet because he was afraid of what Gacy would have done to him if he had told someone about it. They finished the job up in Florida and went back to Chicago, where the very next day, the boy met Gacy at his house and beat him up in front of his wife and two stepdaughters. Half was understandably very confused about what was happening because, as far as she knew, they had just gone to Florida, finished up the job, and everything was fine. Eventually, when the boy left and Gacy had gone back inside the house, Hoff started asking him what was going on, and he told her that he and his employee had gotten into a fight because the boy felt because he felt that the boy was not working hard enough. Hoff never knew the real reason as why the incident had taken place, and the employee never went to the police. When Gacy was almost 34 years old, he came out as bisexual to his wife. Later that night, when the married couple were done having sexual intercourse, Gacy turned to his wife and told her that he would never be doing that again, and that this was the last time he was having sex with her. He still wanted to be with her and loved her, but he said having sex with her made him feel uncomfortable and was unenjoyable for him. From this point on, Gacy would go out with his employees more often. He often did not come home the same night. He started having sex with young teenage boys, and Gacy referred to this as cruising, where he would drive around the streets looking for young teenage boys to pick them up and bring them back to his garage. Hoff knew what was going on, but since she had no proof of Gacy actually cheating on her, she decided that staying quiet would be the best option. She eventually started spying on her husband and looking for proof. He has built this sort of man cave in their garage where he would often invite his employees over to drink. When Hoff entered his garage to see what evidence she could find, she found an excessive amount of homosexual pornography material, and really enough, she found a couple of IDs laying around. These IDs had all have the boys' birthdays on them, which told her that a lot of the guys her husband had been taking home were children, minors. Hoff ended up confronting Gacy about this, and they argued repeatedly for months until Gacy had enough of it and suggested that they should get a divorce. After Hoff lived with her two daughters, Gacy started focusing on work even more. Aside from his job as a contractor, Gacy had decided to join a new club that was new in town called Jolly Jokers Club. This club consisted of few men that would try and help out the community by helping out at children's hospitals and children's parties for free while dressed up as clowns. Gacy's characters was named Pogo the Clown, which was very typical. It was just a very typical clown. He was jolly, had good vibes, and was funny. But then he also had another character which was complete opposites. opposite, named Patches. Patches was more of a depressed, miserable clown. Gacy was really into this whole clown thing. He would spend all of his spare time thinking about how he would design new outfits and thinking about different face paints designs that he could do. One thing that JC loved about being a clown and being a member of this club is that it allowed him to kind of fall back into his childhood, and because he never really had a childhood when he was younger, because he never really had a childhood when he was younger because his dad abused him, and now he felt as if he could distance himself more from his childhood. Gacy loved being a clown so much that he would do all of his work for free. This gave the people in town yet another reason why they should love John Wayne Gacy.
On the evening of January 3rd, 1972, Gacy was driving home from a party when he passed a bus station and saw a young teenage boy sitting alone outside in the cold before a closed bus station. And when Gacy was telling the story to the police, he couldn't remember the boy's name nor his age, so he simply referred to him as the Greyhound busboy, who was later identified as 16-year-old Timothy McCoy. Gacy pulled over and he offered him a tour around the city, and eventually he got McCoy to go to his house and offered him a place to stay for the night. So Gacy took him home and set up the spare bedroom for McCoy and went to sleep in his own bed. And Gacy reported that the next morning he woke up and saw McCoy standing in his doorway holding a kitchen knife, and Gacy's fight and flight instinct immediately kicked in, and he jumped out of bed and knocked the knife out of McCoy's hand, but whilst doing so he accidentally cut his own arm. And when Gacy realized that his arm had been cut, he went into full self-defense mode and started kicking and punching McCoy. And he said that he managed to push McCoy into a wardrobe and close the door, but McCoy managed to kick himself out of the wardrobe, and Gacy got really overwhelmed with a storm of rage, and he shouted at McCoy, saying, "I'll kill you, motherfucker," before stabbing him in the chest multiple times. When he eventually got off the boy who was almost dead, he just laid down next to McCoy's body and started listening to how he was gargling on his own blood while trying to breathe. Gacy then described to the police how he sat on top of McCoy and had an orgasm. He then ejaculated over McCoy's body as he was dying and said, "That's when I realized that death was the ultimate thrill." When he was done, he grabbed the knife, washed off the blood, and took it back to the kitchen. And as he was putting back the knife in the jar, he actually realized what had happened. In the kitchen was laid out multiple ingredients needed to be able to make breakfast. There was milk and an opened pack of bacon and eggs, and that was when he realized that McCoy literally did not have any intention of killing him, but was holding the knife because he had come to Gacy's bedroom in the middle of making him breakfast as a way of thanking him. Gacy had to get rid of the body, so he buried McCoy's body somewhere on his land and poured concrete on top of it, and this was actually used as the foundation for his garage that he would later turn into a man cave. Gacy said that after he murdered this boy, he was a bit too scared to do it again, and he had a 2-year cooling off period. So after 2 years, in January 1974, Gacy had murdered his second victim. This victim is unfortunately still not identified to this day.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah, a lot of his victims are unidentified, unfortunately. But yeah, Gacy told the police that he had strangled this boy with a rope and then stored his corpse in a wardrobe. Gacy did not know what to do with the body, so he just stored it into the wardrobe for a while, and within a few days the bedroom was filled with a strong, disgusting smell. His wife at the time either did not notice it or was just not bothered by it, and when Gacy went to check up on the body, he noticed that it was leaking fluids, and it was leaking into the carpet and was just smelling very bad. So he had decided that he had to do something about this, and he actually got one of his employees to dig out a crawl space underneath the house. And Gacy eventually moved the body into the crawl space, and this was the first body that he would go on to store there. Later on, he would store more bodies there, and Gacy told the police that he had learned a lesson from this murder, and from now on he would stuff his victim's mouth with cloth or underwear to stop leaking. After his divorce with Carol Hoff, the rate at which he was killing his victims speeded up very fast. The next 30 out of the 33 murders he had committed took place over the next 2 years, so from 1976 to 1978. I'm not going to go over all of these murders because it's 30
Yeah,
murders.
it's very many. It's a lot.
It's too much, and unfortunately, to this day, still a lot of his victims are unidentified, and I hope that they will be identified later on in the future, if that's possible. But yeah, not many victims survived. I think there was only 2 or 3 of his victims that he would actually let go free. So finally, Gacy's 33rd and thankfully last victim was 15-year-old Robert Priest, who was a part-time employee at a pharmacy in his town. Gacy had met up with Priest outside of the pharmacy and told him that he had a job for him. That's how he managed to lure the boy back to his house. Once they were there, Gacy showed him the handcuff trick, and this was basically a trick where he would cuff himself and then tell the boys that he was going to show them how he could free himself from the handcuffs or something. So he was doing that trick, and when he was doing that trick, Gacy told Priest that he was going to rape him, that he could do nothing about it while tying a rope around his neck as tight as possible. During all of this, Gacy's phone went off, and while having the business call, he was enjoying listening to Priest slowly strangle to death because of the rope around his neck. Priest was reported missing on December 11th, 1978. And Gacy had been at the store earlier that day to discuss a remodeling project with the owner of the pharmacy, who was Phil Thorpe. After Priest's shift had ended at 9 p.m., he asked his mother if she could wait for a bit outside because he had planned to talk to a contractor who wanted to talk to him about a job, and that contractor was Gacy, obviously. But when his mother came back to pick him up, he was nowhere to be found, and that's when his mom reported him as missing to the police. The owner of the pharmacy informed the police that it was Gacy who had offered Priest a job, but when Gacy was later interrogated by the police, he denied those claims. And even though Gacy claimed that this was not true, that this was false, the police became very suspicious of Gacy, and on December 13th, they obtained a search warrant for his home. And during this search, there had been evidence found of Priest previously being inside the house. So Gacy was then placed under police supervision, and whilst being under supervision, he had been caught dealing drugs illegally and was arrested. He then confessed to this crime, which led to another search of his home, where the police would eventually find human bones in the crawl space underneath his house. And shortly after this discovery, he was arrested, and he knew his arrest was unavoidable, so he put out a statement which confessed him murdering 33 teenage boys.
Human bones?
Yeah, man. It's so crazy. People are so crazy in this world.
Gacy was then asked to draw out a map of the crawl space and try to point out where the bodies were. So the next day, a archaeological investigation happened where they tried to recover as many of the bones as possible. So after almost 3 years of this investigation and searching the house, the police were finally done, and the whole of his house was demolished. Before going to trial, Gacy had to undergo more than 300 hours of psychological tests and observation, and he was really trying to seem as if he was mentally ill, mentally insane, because he knew that if he was found legally sane, he would most likely get the death penalty, whilst if he could seem like he was mentally insane, he would only get some time in prison or lifelong in a mental hospital. So he tried to convince all of these psychiatric doctors that he had a multiple personality disorder consisting of the clown, the contractor, the politician, and Jack Hanley. I don't know where this Jack Hanley name come from, if it's coming from something. I could not find anything about that, but yeah, he told his psychiatrist that when he confessed to the police about these murders, he was actually confessing to Jack's crimes, and that the clown, politician, and contractor had nothing to do with any of this. The doctors obviously did not believe any of this because the story did not sound genuine, and Gacy was just not experiencing any of the other symptoms that come with this disorder. So it just felt like a desperate attempt to be seen as mentally ill to avoid the death penalty. So even though they did not think he had this multiple personality disorder, he ended up getting diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And the doctors thought that these multiple personalities that Gacy had claimed to have were actually just the voices in his head. And because of this diagnosis, Gacy's team decided that it would be best for him to try to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, and that he was not in a right mind at the time when committing his crimes and stuff. So yeah, when they eventually realized that this was not like an excuse he would get away with, they decided to switch up their story, and they literally tried to say that the deaths were accidental and that all of Gacy's victims had died from erotic asphyxiation, which would mean that they had all contended to being choked or strangled during sexual intercourse. When the trial was happening, a bunch of witnesses were called up, some old employees of him and one of his surviving victims. And when the victim was actually being interviewed, they made him go into detail of what had happened, and it got to a point where he literally had to throw up, which made it clear how traumatized he was by Gacy. And Gacy was, during these statements that the victims were giving, literally laughing and smirking as if he was
so cruel.
It's disgusting. He was literally enjoying listening to what he had done to all these boys. So yeah, Gacy eventually sent a letter to the judge saying that he wanted a real retrial because he did not like the way that his lawyer had acted towards him. And the judge just told Gacy to shut up and just denied the request. He told Gacy that if he wanted to testify, no one was going to stop him, but there would definitely be no retrial. At the end of the trial, the prosecution called Gacy one of the worst serial murderers in U.S. history. His team still tried to argue that Gacy would not benefit from being locked away, and said he needed treatment, that he needed hospitalization and not a prison cell. But Gacy eventually was found guilty of all 33 murders and several sexual offenses, and for his crimes, he was sentenced to the death penalty, and his death date was scheduled for May 10th, 1994. His last words to his lawyer were, "Taking my life will not compensate for the loss of others. The state is murdering me." Gacy had the opportunity to have one last meal, which consisted of a bucket of KFC chicken.
Ironic.
Ironic indeed. Deep fried chicken, a pound of strawberries, and a bottle of Diet Coke. He then prayed with a Catholic priest and was sent straight to the execution room, where he died of lethal injection. His last words ever were, "Kiss my ass."
That's a way to go, man. That's really a way to go. But yeah, that was John Wayne Gacy's case, and now on to the next and final episode. Thank you for listening to episode 3 of PodCrime. I'll see you guys next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.